It's a pleasure to be here. I have a vested interest in Rotary itself, and that's why when Ganesh called and asked me to speak to all of you, my late brother was a very active Rotary member in Chennai and was a governor for a while as well, to the topic at hand, which is philanthropy. The Indiaspora group is a very affluent group because the Indian American person makes on average $120,000 a year. Just to give you comparison, an average American makes $50,000 a year. We make more than twice what an average American makes. So it is incumbent on us to give back more than our fair share. So we started with that premise. If we indeed make this much money, how much money are we giving back? That was a question people asked. So we did a survey and we got over 1,000 respondents. And much to our chagrin, the response was not that positive. Indian Americans said they give less than the American average in terms of giving back. And this was not a good thing. But some of the positive things that came out of the survey was Indian Americans volunteered more than the average American, more than twice the average American. So what we couldn't do in money, we gave in time, which was a very positive thing. Now we looked into the money part. Why do Indian Americans not give as much or say they don't give as much? I think some of it goes to what is counted as charity. In the US, what is counted as charity is you get a tax deduction. That means you've given to charity. What this means is if we send money to our relatives in India, to our grandparents, our poor brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts, that does not count as charity because we're remitting money to India. That's not a tax deductible event. So some of the money goes to that. We also found people are not willing to give money because there's a trust deficit. People say that if we send money to India to charitable causes, that the money gets siphoned off by people. It doesn't actually go to the cause. So we have to build up a confidence that if people do contribute to charities in India, the money is actually being used. That was another reason why people were not contributing. The third reason was they didn't have role models. They didn't see many, many people in public life making big, big contributions. Our Jewish people in the US make those kind of contributions where buildings are named after them, symphony halls are named after them, large edifices are named after them, and that motivates other people to give money. And we give less money because we think our friends are giving less money. So we got to change that perception to give more money. So these are all the things we're trying to do. And then our members came to us and said, Indiaspora has to take a goal, just like we did in politics. To be 1% of the politicians, we have to set a goal. So Indiaspora has now set a goal to say we'll double the giving and impact that the diaspora community makes. So let me give you a little bit of facts about the diaspora community. There are 30 million people like me who live outside the US. Of course, the US diaspora is about 4 million, is considered the most successful diaspora. But we have very successful diaspora in the UK, in Canada, in Dubai, and Singapore, and many other places. So our goal is over the next several years, we want to double the giving and impact that this community makes, both to the countries we live in, we made our money in, but also to contribute to causes in India. So that's the goal we have set at Indiaspora. So then the question is, how do we go about actually achieving this goal? So the first thing we did was to have a summit. So we said, let's get donors, nonprofits, foundations, and others together to start discussing the issues, to bring issues to the forefront. So we have an annual philanthropy summit. This is held usually around Gandhi Jayanti. And we get many, this year we had, for example, Ramesh Wadhwani, who's an Indian American billionaire, who's also signed the Gates Giving Pledge to come and inspire us. So we also had, for example, Vidya Shah, who heads up Edelgive, to come and talk. So we have all these inspiring people come talk to us. We have NGOs work with us and so on and so forth. The other thing Indiaspora has done to further the cause of philanthropy is to get all the Indian organizations who are set up in the US, who give to India. We wanted to get that group together. That group didn't think of themselves as friends. They thought of themselves as competitors. For example, an organization you're familiar with called Pratham. There's another organization here called Akshay Patra, Ekal Vidyalaya. So many of these organizations, AIF, America India Foundation and stuff, used to all work by themselves. But what Indiaspora did, we invested in a group called the India Philanthropy Alliance, or IPA. This is a group now of 15 organizations that primarily collects money in the US and gives that money to India to get together in the US so that they can work together to increase the pie. Right now, the pie of giving to India through these organizations is not that much. It's only about between 125 and 150 million dollars come through these organizations like Pratham and Akshay Patra and others to India. And the goal is to start increasing the money. And the only way to do that is to talk about India, to talk about why India needs money, to talk about how we can help India, not just within the Indian American community, but with the greater American community, foundations and others who are willing to write checks for good causes to India. So that is another investment Indiaspora has made, is to get the India Philanthropy Alliance going, and for these organizations to work with each other to increase the mind share amongst the American public and to get more money for good causes in India. The next thing we do here is called an online program called Chalo Give. And Chalo Give started 3 years ago, and we said, how can we get the greater Indian American population? There are about 4 million Indians who live in the United States. And many of them, can't give $10,000 and $100,000, but they can afford to give $10, $20, $50, $100 to causes. So we started this online campaign where you can go to a website and you can donate to an organization of your choice. So we did this 2 years ago around Gandhi Jayanti. Again, we are working and inspired by a big program in India that's called Daan Utsav that a lot of you are familiar with, where Indian Americans around Gandhi Jayanti for a whole week volunteer, give money, and do projects around seva and giving back. So we were inspired by that. There's also a program in the US called Giving Tuesday, where around the Thanksgiving Tuesday, people just donate money online. And last year, you won't believe it, in the US, it's become such a success. $400 million got donated in one day to organizations in the US. So our aspiration is Chalo Give one day will result in millions of dollars being given to charity. Right now, we had Chalo Give this year, totally focused on the COVID relief. So when COVID hit, our members came to us and said, we have to do something. And we have to do something for people in the US where we live, but also to people in India. So we focused around hunger, because we said one of the things that happens around COVID and around crises is people go hungry. So we ended up picking two organizations. We picked an organization in the US called Feeding America that works with 200 food banks around the US to give food to people who are hungry. And in India, we picked a great organization called Goonj that you're very familiar with, who was delivering, ration kits to migrant workers. So using these two organizations, Indiaspora raised $1.2 million that enabled 8 million meals to be given to migrant workers and to hungry people in the US. So that is our way of raising money, coming up with a cause, and actually delivering. It shows the character of the Indian American community. When there's a crisis, people actually gave money to a cause. So again, that was another way for us to show how we can be philanthropic, to be a role model. If we step back for a minute and look at Indian Americans and how they give money in the US, this is a very interesting journey that we are undertaking. In the US, I believe right now, about $400 million is donated each year to causes, $400 million. The Americans are very generous people. They are also generous because they get a tax deduction too. And I'm sure in India, it's the same way. So we said, how is this $400 million being given and donated and used? So we tried to do the same look into the Indian American community. Where does money go in the Indian American community to causes, other than remitting money to India and stuff? So you will be surprised that the biggest amount of money amongst Indian Americans has gone to temples. And for good reason. We never had temples when we came here. We decided that we needed to build temples. But again, the money given to temples in the US, you will be surprised, we estimate is over the last 20 years. And this is a number that will be a big number. It's between $5 and $10 billion have been given to temples. But it's not a surprise. We looked at American numbers. We went back 40, 50 years and looked at numbers of giving to churches in the United States. 50 years ago, 2/3 of the money donated in India went to, in the US, went to religious causes. Over time, people get enlightened. They go, there's more than religion. There's education. There are other causes like healthcare, hunger relief, so on and so forth. So the Americans now have gone from 2/3 of giving to religious causes, which is primarily to churches. Fast forward 40, 50 years, they only give 1/3 to churches and causes. 2/3 of the money now goes to other relief. So the Indian American community, if you look at a continuum, we started with temples. We have now moved to education because, as you know, education is so important to Indians, and we in the US have the same ethos. We want our kids to be doctors and lawyers and engineers and successful educators and so forth. So we then went to find out how much money has gone to education. How much money have Indian Americans donated to educational causes? And this is also a surprisingly high number. Indian Americans have given $1.2 billion in the last 20 years to institutions of higher learning, to universities in the US. So we now see Indian Americans moving from temples to education to other causes. So we see that Indiaspora's role is to educate people so they keep moving down this continuum and giving to healthcare, giving to hunger, giving to other causes that will help society as a whole in the US and also in India. So that's the journey that Indian Americans are taking today. So Indiaspora's role is to be a platform, to be a force to educate people, to inspire people, to motivate people, and get Indian Americans to give, because I'm looking at it also selfishly, right? When there's a crisis in the US, you want people to look at Indian Americans as people to go to, not a group to say, these are the stingy people. You know, we want to be known as givers and not takers. We come to the US, we work, we save money, and we don't give back. So that is one of Indiaspora's role, is to project how Indian Americans are giving back. So we have a report that details how $1.2 billion has gone to education. The next thing Indiaspora is doing to inspire the entire diaspora is we are now undertaking a philanthropy leaders list. So we are now working worldwide, including India, US, UK, Canada, Dubai, Singapore, all these different countries, to identify Indians in the diaspora who have been givers. And in the first quarter of next year, we'll be releasing a report, a list of philanthropists in the diaspora. Again, we hope people like Ramesh Wadhwani and others who have signed the Giving Pledge will be the inspiring people who will motivate the entire community to give more. Thank you for having me.